Hi there, my name is Lauren Ranzetti and I work at the AGO as an adult instructor. And today for Senior Social, we're going to be looking at Gerald Gladstone's Galaxy paintings, three in particular. So Galaxy 1 has all kinds of whites and really lovely marks that are black lines. Galaxy 2 is just all black lines, but lots and lots of density of line and a nice light brown ground. And then in Galaxy 3, tons of really dark, heavy marks. Okay, so when I was looking at Gerald's work, I was thinking about the circles and the lines and mark making and accumulation of line, really thin line to really fat line. So what I'm going to do is I'm using a bunch of different materials. I'm going to use really large jumbo Sharpies, medium-sized Sharpie, a super fine Sharpie. But I'm also going to look at using watercolor crayon, chalk pastel that's like a Conte, a black and a white, but also oil pastel makes some really lovely marks. And I'm using craft paper, which has a really nice neutral tone. You can also use what's called a China marker, which is in fact actually just a grease pencil that has this lovely paper they get to peel away when you've used it. So that's kind of fun as opposed to sharpening it. So for this picture, what I'm thinking of doing is I want to start off with really big, thick marks. So I'm kind of doing a little bit of all three of their styles but in marker. So if it's about galaxies, I mean, I think that's a really loose interpretation of the marks that are being made within the paintings. And I'm using a marker that's not very good on purpose. It even says bad on it, to just give myself a bit of variety of value. So I do throw out markers, but in the end, before I throw them out, I really try and utilize them in their best setting, which is when I want to have different values. So now I'm going to go to the one that's marked good, and it will give me a much darker line. So I'm thinking about just dissecting the page in a bunch of big swoops. And I'm starting with my biggest painting or mark making tool, and I'm trying to use my whole arm. So I'm using quite big paper. This is 18 by 24 paper. And this is just to sort of give me a notion of the shape that I'm interested in. Now, so I've got quite a bit of the page already covered. I'm going to use a thinner marker now, and I'm just going to play around with the shapes of things that go into this space. And with every marker tool you use, they'll have a different personality. So I don't know if it's visible to see the marks that are on top of a black. So I'm going to do that mark on the black that's not quite so new. And what Gerald is using is he's doing a lot of really sharp linear work. So I think I'm going to play around with that linear quality in the second painting of his that has lots of circles and lines in it. And you could use a ruler, but you can also just go in and, if you're using your whole arm as opposed to your fingers, like don't use your wrist, use your forearm, you'll get a pretty straight line. And so I'm accumulating darkness through layering on top of itself, right? And so you can really have a good time with that notion of layering. When you're using more than one tool, I'm going to start with the markers first, because markers don't work well on oil pastel, chalk pastel, China marker, crayon. They, in fact, can get wrecked pretty easily. So I don't want to ruin those, the markers. And you can really play around with what kinds of marks you make in any one area. And so you could spend quite a bit of time making marks. The quicker you use a marker, the more it will look like it's not functioning at its height. So if you want to have a really nice dark mark, going slower with the tool will give you a better mark. And then think about, you've got really thick marks and you've got thinner marks, but you can go really thin and accent them in an area where you have a few other values or thicknesses. And so you can play around with that in terms of pattern making. Now, the other thing that he did was he would have ideas on top of ideas on top of ideas. And so I haven't actually started doing that yet. I've got mostly things all separate from each other. So I'm going to start working on top of other areas. But I'm still pretty much in marker mode. So as you're working, I'm not actually trying to make something that is realistic. This would be considered an abstract piece right away because I'm not trying to emulate a galaxy. I am thinking about what galaxies are, which is, basically a grouping of stars that are expanding out from a certain area. And over time, they move. So there's this rhythm of movement that I'm kind of playing around with. And that, quite a few galaxies actually have planets that are rotating around something. So I kind of like that notion of moving objects that are moving around something. That around something, what could it be? It could be a sun. So now I'm going to start putting in some of these other tools. So I've decided that I kind of like the notion of some really, really thin lines in some areas. And the buildup of those thin lines will give you a darker line, but it'll have a different personality than if I was just using the super thick markers. And don't feel that just because you've done something once with a big marker that you're going to put it away and never use it again. I'm going to go in and I'm going to go over top of areas because I really want them to be very, very dark. So I'm doing quite a few layers on top of certain aspects. And if you really want it to be a different mark or a different color of black, then you can use a different tool. So I'm going to use oil pastel, and oil pastel has a very different personality than the marker. Now I can't put any marker on top of the areas that are going to have this particular tool being used because it will just wreck the marker. So I am now committing to a different medium altogether. And the thing that's nice about oil pastel is the way you blend with it is you use the pastel with another pastel to blend. You can blend with your finger, but it doesn't work quite as well. Q-tip does not work with oil pastel at all. Q-tips really only work with chalk-based products or pencil. You can use pencil to kind of create some nifty marks. And if I really want something to be white, then I can kind of just keep going over that area again and again and again. But I can blend to create a few different tones. This is very creamy. This oil pastel is really nice high-end pastel, so I can use my finger to blend with it. You can even use linseed oil with oil pastels, mineral spirits. You can use vegetable oil. That's another thing that you can kind of blend with. It's better to use something that is supposed to be for painting, though not cooking. And so I can just keep working on this and developing more and more mark making in an area. Now I've also got a chalk pastel and a charcoal, which has a bit of a different feel to it than the oil pastel. So I think I'm going to go in and just fill in an area. Now you can see it's creating a lot of dust. And if I go in with the white, it's going to turn it into gray right away. It has a hard time staying white. And you can blend. The challenge with oil and chalk pastel is you really don't have very many layers that you can work with. You kind of get 3 tries at it and then it just says, I can't do any more. So I'm going to keep that blended in, and then I'm just going to go in and have some sharper marks on top of it. So I could just keep working away on this and adding more and more detail, but the more tools you use, the more you have to be careful of not using the marker in the oil pastel or using the marker in the chalk pastel, because that just will not work. So this is not by any means done. I think there's more things that I could do with it, but I want to just show you another piece that I've got going on here that has a little bit more, it's a little bit more finished, and I could go in and add more details to that to play around the fact that I want the density of lots and lots of marks. And so it is one of those things that you could work on it in one direction and then turn it around and work on it in another direction. So I'm actually turning it around just so that I'm not reaching over, but also so I can get a different viewpoint from this piece. I have super skinny, really, really tiny buildup of lines here. And as your pen, the quicker you work your pen, the more scratchy it'll be. And so it will be not as tight a line. It will be a little bit scritchy, scratchy. And I've used oil pastel here. I'm going to go back in with that a little bit and just make it a little bit, even a bit more dense. And what I did was I used my finger to kind of blend it a little bit. And you can do that with the oil pastel or the chalk pastel. And that can give you quite a nice mark within it. So I think I want to put in just a little bit more white. And this time I'm using the chalk pastel. And playing around with that, the blending of it. And if you don't like what you've got, you can always tighten it back up again with its counterpart. Chalk pastel likes chalk pastel, oil pastel likes oil pastel. You could try and use them together. I'm putting oil pastel on top of chalk and it really doesn't want to do that. But it doesn't wreck either of the tools, it just creates a bit of a different texture. But don't do it with the markers. The markers really need to stay with what they are. In this area, I was using watercolor crayons and watercolor crayons on top. So there's some neat things going on with this, and you'll get to see the finished product at the end. But I just want you to know that it's important that you try different surfaces, using different materials, trying different variations on a theme, and explore the notion of a thick marker to a super thin marker, or chalks versus oil pastel. And whatever it is that you do make, we would love to see it on the Instagram using hashtag AGOmakes when you're posts so that other people can take a look at it too. So try it yourself. Gerald Gladstone Galaxy Paintings in your own materials. Have a great day. Thank you so much.